I'm Mark Blattner. I'm the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation, and we're delighted to welcome so many people to our latest in our Thoughtful Thursday conversation series that we've been doing on a monthly basis. Tonight, excuse me. Tonight you are in for a real treat. We have Rabbi Elka Abrahamson, who is the president of the Wexner Foundation. She oversees the full range of activities in partnership with the foundation chairman and her mentors, Abigail and Leslie Wexner, and imagines how the foundation might further strengthen and educate Jewish professional and volunteer leaders in North America and public service leaders in the state of Israel. She is a proud member of the Frozen Chosen, being a native Minnesotan, where she earned her teaching degree from the University of Minnesota and spent her early years creating curricula for religious schools and informal educational settings, particularly Jewish camps. Her Jewish soul sprang to life at Camp Herzl in Wisconsin, where she's coming from us tonight, not at the camp, but in Wisconsin. And her Jewish leadership blossomed at Camp Swig in Northern California. Rabbi Abrahamson was ordained at HUC in New York City and began her career as an associate rabbi in San Mateo, California. And her husband is also a rabbi, so we're delighted by that. And Rabbi Abrahamson is a dynamic speaker, an engaging teacher. Newsweek once named her one of the 50 most influential rabbis in all of North America. So let me welcome you to the Portland Jewish community and welcome Rabbi Elka Abrahamson. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And I want to add a personal and heartfelt thank you to you and your Federation team. We are really excited to welcome a new Heritage class from Portland to our Heritage program, and we appreciate your patience during this year of waiting. It was a really hard decision for us to delay the program for a year, but we knew it was the right one. We also know that more than ever, educated, collaborative individuals will be needed to exercise meaningful leadership in the coming year, and we are committed to that vision as your partner. Some of you may know a little bit about the foundation, and pluralism is one of the core values that we embrace. We even cling to that at our foundation. And so tonight, in order to make this a thoughtful Thursday, I'm going to ask you to think with me about how we as a community can embrace and foster respectful debate and dissent in our communities during this time. I'll say increasing polarization, but I don't know how much more polarized we can become. It's really very much on my mind. It's a topic that I've been speaking about for years and doing my best to practice and not just preach. A hallmark of the Wexner Foundation's leadership programs is bringing diverse cohorts together and generating productive discomfort in order to uncover common purpose and Jewish connection, while acknowledging and keeping in the room our differences. I think about that a lot. I study it, I read about it, and practice holding conversations across conflicting views, which are easy to find. Before I was writing for tonight, I reviewed various outlines that I have put together from the last 5 years, the last 10 years, various sources, even sermons for High Holy Days on this topic, and I find a through line. And the through line is this. Every time I speak about this over the years, I say civil discourse is growing increasingly difficult, or it's more and more difficult to talk across difference today than it ever has been. I wrote that a decade ago, I wrote that 5 years ago, and of course tonight, I can make that claim, I think, without any equivocating. I accepted the lovely invitation to speak this evening a few months ago, actually in July, and I was aware that it would be 2 weeks or so following an extraordinarily contentious election. I expected that ours would be a deeply divided country, though I have to admit, I could not have imagined the unsettling anxieties in which we live right now. A peaceful transition of power is in peril. A pandemic is raging far beyond our control. And yes, thank God there's an approaching reality of a vaccine and a vacuum of national leadership, while neighbors and even families wonder when they will start talking to each other again. So let's focus only on our mishpacha, our own family.
Among ourselves, we get along perfectly well. Of course, there was the time when he sold him a horse and he delivered a mule. But that's all settled now. Now we live in simple peace and harmony. It was a mule.
It was a horse!
It was a mule!
No, I tell you, it was a horse!
Superman all over the
Tradition. Without our traditions, our lives would be as shaky as a fiddler on the roof.
I suppose some of you would like to just watch the movie, but that was now, that was then, and this is now. The ability to talk across our differences, our ever widening gulfs, that ability has eroded tremendously since the horse mule controversy. So let's put the spotlight on ourselves, because healthy Jewish communities, and by extension, high functioning Jewish organizations, must be built on a foundation of trust, transparency, and holy relationships. Our sacred narrative as a people begins, literally it starts with this notion as a central belief. In chapter 1 of Genesis, we read, "And God created the human in God's image, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, male and female were we created." I recently heard a colleague share that her congregant asked this question during a sermon: what is the opposite of Judaism? What is the opposite of Judaism? The man's answer: physical distancing. To be at a distance from our communities for so many months, for so many life cycle events, holidays, yortzites, daily minyan, Shabbat services, and on, even as we are all doing remarkable work, evidenced by this gathering, to connect to one another through virtual platforms, physical distancing is the opposite of what our tradition wants from us. Recall that we begin our daily worship with the words, Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, how beautiful are your tents, Mishkanotecha Yisrael, your neighborhoods, O Israel. That is the unexpected blessing uttered by an ancient enemy when seeing how we lived. In our formative years, as you can see here, we set up our encampment circled around one sacred center. But our sages tell us that the doorways to our tents all faced opposite directions. So each family could maintain some privacy, could respect one another's unique space, and we could each have our own view, literally and physically. It was, we are taught, a key to living peacefully as a united tribe. Each and every one of us made in God's image, but each and every one of us allowed our own viewpoint. If I can push that metaphor a bit, today our tents are blowing over. Many of us have just closed up our flaps and we peek out to see only what's ahead of us, only our own view. We're wandering in a new wilderness of vitriol, blame, and accusation. Our tribalism has been redefined, one against the other in this era. I think you know this, but the first presidential debate demonstrated for me just how broken our culture of discourse really is. Rules tossed out and the exchange of ideas fully ignored in favor of one voice dominating by any means possible. I really found that 2-hour assault on civility to be representative, or should I say, it was an infuriating lens through which we might take a snapshot of the current climate of our discourse. That debate, if you want to call it that, or debacle was shocking not only because of what we witnessed, all of us as a nation. It was devastating for me for what it failed to model. Legitimate disagreement, healthy opposition, both within our community and wider in our country. We crave constructive debate. We've lost it. We're well served by a high-functioning two-party system, but respectful and rigorous disagreement, it's crumbling. And even worse right now is that truth is being gamed. According to Pew, I love Pew and I think their work is amazing, they learned that 65% of adults in our country report an inability to distinguish truth from fiction when listening to politicians. By contrast, a majority of us, 70%, say it is not hard to determine the truth when we are talking to people we know. Specific to the moment we are in, while 73% of Republicans believe that President-elect Joe Biden won the election, only 30% today believe that he won fairly. That's a staggering window into how torn apart we are as a country. There's no evidence of widespread fraud, cheating, or the stealing of votes. Indeed, democracy itself came through as a sturdy winner. While the Trump campaign has every right to pursue legal avenues to uncover any problems, it is nonetheless unsettling that 70% of the president's supporters stand with unproven claims of a rigged process. I know that time and judicial processes might lower that number, but the situation leaves me wondering, is civil discourse really possible anymore in the aftermath of this scorched earth presidential race? I think it is. But first, let's step away from this really hard question to remember that as Jews, we are a community built to take the heat of a good argument. That's what we do. Yes, we're the people of the book, but we're also the people of the book of debate. That artfulness of civil discourse is woven tightly into our tradition. It is the scaffolding upon which our texts are built. Look at the Mishnah. We read, any argument that is for the sake of heaven, a machloket shehi l'shem shamayim, that will endure. And any argument is not for the sake of heaven, not for a greater good, in the end, it will not endure. The Talmud represents a dense record of our disagreements, 63 tractates, thousands of pages of differences of opinions chronicled for all time. We can follow in sometimes mind-numbing detail both the majority and the opposing opinions on hundreds of decisions shaping Jewish law and life. Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai are, as most of you know, among the Talmud's most popular second century leaders. Those two rabbis engaged in some 350 arguments, and Hillel almost always won. But the way in which they engaged is offered as a model for how to disagree. They really are our mentors who frame for all time how to argue for a better cause, for the sake of heaven, l'shem shamayim. The Talmud even goes further and describes for us their relationship so that we might model it. We're told, although Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed about the laws of marriage, Beit Shammai did not abstain from marrying women of the families of Beit Hillel. And though they argued over what made a pot or a spoon kosher, Beit Hillel never refrained from eating in the home of Beit Shammai. So they fought all the time about the law and how to live by it, and they remained connected. They remained trusted friends. Differing on almost everything did not impede a holy relationship. And one more thing the Talmud tells us about these two. They reveal that Hillel's opinions prevailed precisely because his students always listened first. They developed a practice of honoring and recording Shammai's opinions before recording their own. By esteeming an opposing point of view with respect and deference, Hillel and his students taught by example that contrasting opinions matter. Would a visitor from the future watch us in our boardrooms and report back that the Jewish community weighed each other's opinions respectfully, wrote down the other's thoughts first, and gave each other our due? I'm not sure. Let's go a different direction and see what happens when we disagree. With the stakes of our debate growing ever louder and stakeholders increasingly emotional, I'm going to invite you to take yourself back to 5th grade. You get to be 5th grade students for the next few minutes, and I get to be the 5th grade teacher. And I'm going to give you a multiple choice question. I want you to think about it and answer it in the chat. Okay, you ready? Here's the question. The question is, what is corn? It's going to be multiple choice. And here are your choices of answers. Is corn a vegetable, a fruit, a grain, or a grass? So go ahead and record your answer in the chat. We have one brave 5th grader who says it's a grain. How about the rest of you? Grain, grain, a lot of grains. Diana says it's all veggie, all of the above, vegetable, grass. Now I'm going to ask you, write in the chat if you are absolutely sure of your answer. Just say yes. Your mom said it was a starch. Write down in the chat if you are sure of your answer. Just write sure if you're positive. Not sure, not sure. Jean Moss is sure. Good student, not sure, unsure. All right, so some of us are sure, some of us are unsure. 80%. We have a percentage of sureness. I was part of a large group. Caron, I'm not sure if you were there when this happened. I was a part of a large group of Jewish professionals who did this exercise in a workshop on difficult conversations. I want to tell you what happened. The grain was by far the largest group, and I think as our chat came in, it was also came in pretty fast. The grass group was smallish, and the fruit group, just 4 people. We were asked by the facilitator to huddle up in corners and generate a defense for our choices. And we were told we could change groups anytime. The 4 clusters of rabbis, educators, professors, and organizational Jewish leaders enthusiastically went about defending their choices, which were then shared around the room with a spokesperson for each person, sharing out loud. Things like, I grew up in Iowa, I know corn. You're all thinking of the end product. Think about how corn looks. It's a grass. And then another group leader said, I'm a rabbi and I make kashrut my expertise. And if I know anything, it's corn, because think about Pesach. Corn is a grain and corn rises, popcorn, corn flour, grain, done. Someone else stepped forward and said, I've been on Weight Watchers my entire life. And the one consistent over all of the years is that corn is a 3-point starchy vegetable. And of course, there were people with their phones, as I'm sure you have your phones out now, who said, I Googled it, and Rav, Google tells us it's a fruit. That's the answer. But what's interesting is that nobody moved. There was a little bit of a rebellion because a handful of people went into the middle of the room and declared neutrality, saying, corn is everything. They got booed. Take a stand, people said. Will it surprise you that this simple exercise brought out our tendencies to take immovable positions? We take them even when we don't know much about the topic. We cling to them because in only a matter of minutes, we develop an allegiance to our colleagues huddled in the same corner. We invest in our arguments because we get to choose our own authority. Iowans know corn. Weight Watchers can't be wrong. My grandmother was a Weight Watcher. And who would ever doubt a rabbi claiming kashrut as his defense? And we heckled those who wouldn't take a position. Come on, we said, choose. Research reveals that in this exercise, the smaller the group you have in your corner, the less likely you are to leave. We defend those who have the courage to stand with us. And very quickly, we had an emotional attachment to our view of corn. We bonded to like-minded thinkers. For some of our colleagues in the room, the capacity to listen, to ask questions, to understand the position of the other actually diminished the longer the exercise went on, and people just wanted to be right. We managed to create our own Discord bubbles very quickly around corn. We were quite happy staying in those bubbles. At the end of the exercise, we turned to the facilitator and eagerly awaited the truth. Knew who was right? Who won? We wanted to know. Who won? This was a trivial exercise, but it demonstrated how quickly we connect to our position. The Hebrew for disagreement, as we saw in that Mishnah Machloket, has at its root 3 letters, and those 3 letters mean divided. Of course, disagreements can divide us, but the Hebrew language is exquisitely layered with possibility. Listen, that same Hebrew root, chelek, also means a piece, a portion of a whole divided appropriately. So a machloket, a disagreement for the sake of heaven, is one in which we acknowledge that each person around the table merits his or her piece, their chelek of the conversation. Division and device may cease when each person feels they have their appropriate portion, their appropriate time to speak about what they feel like they possess. It's a noble aspiration, right? But imagine embracing that idea when someone you vehemently disagree with advocates his or her position, that the discussion maybe needs the opposing viewpoint for the discourse to be whole. I admit that is a very challenging notion to operationalize. What can we do to make that vision of engagement now, in this moment? How do we listen to the other in this post-truth era, even, sad as it is to say out loud, when we see another person's chelek, their portion of the discourse, to be illegitimate, even to be a lie? Let me throw out a few suggestions. First of all, every person, every topic is not conducive to civil discourse. Hot topic roundtables should begin modestly, and while differing views in the room are essential, truly difficult conversations must unfold constructively among cohort members who demonstrate sincere interest in what another has to say and not in winning. Remember that Pew number? We are more likely to trust people we know. And that's where we have to start, not with the hardest questions or at the most fraught moments. We start with relational questions. Who are you? How are you? How did you reach this position? What's the story that got you here? And I want to say, especially now, that those who sit at the extreme ends, that 10% who hover at the poles of difference, are generally not well suited for such an endeavor, at least not in the early stages. And it's sometimes okay that we don't include everybody on the ends. One other note about our Jewish community inclinations. We have an interesting and sometimes insatiable hunger for heated debate, panels and pairs of speakers who will take off the gloves and deliver punches on both sides of an issue, anti and pro of whatever we're talking about. And we make civil discourse a spectator sport, and it is not. Think of the corn exercise or the presidential debates. Opposing views expressed by those on the far ends of issues sell tickets, and it might make for a good evening of entertainment. But watching others stubbornly defend their own positions only hardens your own. You will cheer on your side, the hero, and boo the other side, the villain, in that show. I often thought that the Jewish community should have programs of where we agree. It might be a better model, but I don't know if it would sell a lot of tickets. Strange as it may seem on this November night, I actually suspect, maybe I pray, that we are really poised to take a turn. Maybe it's this can't get worse position, but a growing number of us are tired of chaos. Leadership by tweet or soundbite has become unsatisfying. There's too much noise, too much alienation, too much blame, and too much door slamming in our own community. Our next gen of Jews is telling us that we need to listen more and lecture less. Perhaps forced COVID time together between parents and adult children is opening hearts and minds. We increasingly shy away from taboo topics, fearing we will lose funders and funding. But increasingly our tents, so plentiful in that picture of the ancient desert, those tents will decrease if we don't create a big tent of opinion, a big tent of viewpoints. We must stay in relationship with each other, identifying first the topics we do agree on, like funding the underserved, Jewish literacy, safe and secure Jewish spaces, summer camps. If I have learned anything from my work in this area, it is that we have to move slowly, deliberately, and begin with relationship building, and then move into areas of agreement before we take on the tougher issues. I'm going to invite you to something sort of hard because your name is on it, but in the spirit of transparency, I want you to put in the chat issues that you think have become taboo in the Jewish community to talk about. Oh, I'm not sure you can all see these. We have Israel with exclamation points. We have the Iran Treaty, Israeli settlements, Palestinian rights, Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm sure if I waited longer, we'd have more, but that's enough right there. And we still have people guessing about corn, thank you. So the question is alienation of young Jews from Judaism, unconditional support for the actions of the government. See, as you get warmed up, these become easier. So Mark, keep that list because you'll have a chance to talk about them. U.S. Embassy being moved. You can keep putting those in, but I'm going to keep going. So how do we talk about these issues? There's 10 right there. We'll take out corn. We take lessons from tradition and we have to abide by rules. There are some qualities of civil discourse taught by tradition. Just 3 that I want to share with you tonight. First, civil discourse emerges from deliberate practice and not only through programs and panels. Na'aseh v'nishma, we learn by doing. Civil discourse is fueled by savlanut, as they say in Hebrew, by patience. Its purpose is not debate, but sustained conversation. It is not debate. Civil discourse rarely just happens. It unfolds through intention, through kavanah. And I'm going to give you a short list of guidelines that could be much longer, but some basic things, guidelines that are required for civil discourse. One is you need facilitators who are prepared. Whoops, you need to go back. Whoops, go back. I'm on slide 11. Okay, I'll just talk. You need prepared facilitators. You need very clear, agreed upon rules of engagement, and those are everywhere. If you Google civil discourse rules of engagement, you'll find many documents. You can easily write up your own, and a good facilitator will bring those. You need willing and committed participants who will stay in the room. I know that sounds ridiculous. Committed participants who will stay in the room and follow the rules. You need to create discomfort, and that needs to be okay. but it has to be contained and focused and productive. And that's what a facilitator is for. You must have people who are curious, really curious about what someone else is thinking. I think curiosity is a muscle, and in boardrooms and in classrooms and in the Jewish community, we have to get that muscle back into shape. We must be genuinely curious about what the other one thinks. And finally, you have to enter with the presumption that yours is not the only truth. And it requires this: the ability to stand in the shoes of the other, which brings me to one more really important thing we have to bring to community conversations. The unyielding truth at the center of this enterprise of civil discourse is that it is not about changing the minds or opinions or positions of the other. That's what we want to do, but that's not the point of conversation. It is about the ability to meaningfully change yourself. If you seek a silver bullet plan pulled from our tradition for swiftly bringing our community to a place of healthy disagreement, there's no such thing. Having spent years facilitating and engaging in difficult conversations and getting it right, here's the most honest answer, the most compelling text I can bring you from our tradition. The Tosefta asks, if the Torah is given by a single God, provided by a single shepherd, how is it the case that there exist such differing opinions, differing interpretations about what it says? And here's what our rabbis tell us. Make yourself a heart of many rooms and bring into it the words of the house of Shammai and the words of the house of Hillel. Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory wrote of this verse, one must strive to be a person in whom different opinions can reside together in the very depths of your soul. A person who can feel religious conviction and passion without the need for simplicity and absolute certainty. Building such a heart is just plain difficult, and it is constructed through practice, naaseh, through patience, savlanut, and through intention, kavanah. Look, we can be hard-hearted. We're the stiff-necked people. A troubling scientific study was conducted among groups with seriously opposing positions, Palestinians and Israelis, Republicans and Democrats. What the researchers found was something they called political motive asymmetry. Motive asymmetry. It's the phenomenon of assuming your ideology, your position is based in love, but your opponent's ideology is based in hate. It's common in charged conflicts, and I think we are seeing it playing out today. Think about it. People are sitting around the same table thinking, you know, my view is based in kindness and truth. I want to help people, but you're spiteful and you're mean. We can't move as a community with this asymmetry. It's impossible. Look, we all do it. We know that Trump voters see Biden voters as elitist, urbanite, wealthy, white collar, politically correct, lawless, anti-Semitic, corrupt DC swamp supporters. Trump voters, well, they're gun-toting, culture-deprived, climate change denying, misogynist, anti-Semitic, unscientific racists. Now, I could ask you to put in the chat other things you think about each other, but I don't think that would be productive. Not a small number of us are stuck in those asymmetrical positions on any number of issues. I've seen it play out many times. And as I'm sure you know, the left believes the right is unyielding and closed-minded. The right is stunned by the left's inability to listen to other views. Our own community's political discussions on Israel provide us a glaring, if painful, example of motive asymmetry. And we saw it here in the chat. So yes, we have work to do on changing ourselves, on trying to be more symmetrical in our attitudes toward the other. But we must, in the words of the Tosefta, open up new rooms in our hearts. We have to do that. We need to practice what these same researchers call Ideological flexibility. Ideological flexibility. It's not an exercise in naivete, and honestly, not all those heart rooms are so easily opened. There exist real and legitimate differences between us, especially now when truth itself is hard to discern. What is true is that in the spirit of machloket l'shem shamayim, arguments for the sake of heaven, we each have the right to our own chelek, our own unique view, and that balance is hard to maintain when even the facts are debatable. So we have to push that theological flexibility beyond the surface and spend time on the issues that we all believe are for the common good, like those we've mentioned. Please, please remember on this Thoughtful Thursday, if you remember nothing else, remember that the goal of speaking across difference does not require you or anyone else to change your mind, just to open it. It doesn't mean that the other person is right. It means they have a right to their opinion. It means just understanding where someone else is coming from, rather than wondering or saying out loud, how can you say that? Allow your inner voice to scream at them while your real voice says, help me understand why you believe that. That's what gets you out of your own corners, what pulls you out of our echo chamber. Ideological flexibility compels us to work on that essential midah, that essential soul trait of empathy. Empathy, from the Greek empathia, a combination of into, and pathos, feelings. It's a particular way of journeying into someone else's emotional world, crossing the border into the heart of the other. You can't do that with assumptions, with snap judgments, stereotypes, or anger, as tempting as that is. We all do it. That's asymmetrical. Empathy signals to the other that you see the other as created in the image of God. It's taking a break from me to focus on you. In one of his last interviews, Elie Wiesel recalled a visit to Berlin in 1985 where he met a group of young Germans. At that moment, he said, I had never before considered that it could be as painful to be the children of those who ran the camps as to be the child of those who died in them. You cannot imagine the affection I had for those children. I wanted to help them. Just imagine the singular ability of Dr. Wiesel to cross that divide. His remarkable response revealed his finely honed midah of empathy. And that's what paves the way to civil discourse. We can't begin those conversations in crisis or panic mode, so it might not be the best time to start. We need to move toward and not away from difficult conversations, lest we become a community of avoidance and push away people who may want to have conversations about things that are important to them, but not to you. We have to be intentional. We have to be reflective. We've got to get out of our echo chambers, out of our silos. We have to discuss before we demand. We have to be flexible and not rigid. Our goal is not unity of mind, it's unity of purpose. I'm going to end these remarks with one teaching, and then we'll have time for comments or questions that are coming up in the chat. We enter Jewish spaces and we pass through doorways with a mezuzah affixed to the doorpost. You all know that it's placed slanting toward the interior of the room. Why? Rabbeinu Tam in the 12th century felt that the mezuzah should be affixed horizontally to honor the tradition of pushing the scroll and its case into the crevices between the stones and the doorways. His grandfather, Rashi, argued that mezuzot should be fixed vertically, the top pointing toward the Almighty. Rabbeinu Tam's position and Rashi's position came to a compromise. Instead of being this way or that way, the mezuzah is hung on the diagonal with its top bowing inward. The decision allowed for Shalom Bayit. That's why they did it. Not because they agreed, but because they didn't want to fight about it. They wanted the symbol on the doorways of our homes to be a symbol of compromise. That's what a mezuzah is. It's a magnificent symbol of compromise. Even complex conversations can end with shlemut, with wholeness. And to Shalom Bayit can lead into a house of peace. So I want us to enter the room with open hearts while we work on building a heart with many rooms. And before I take questions, you may be wondering about the answer. What is corn? Well, those of you who said it was all of the above are partially right, because the answer is, what is corn? It depends on who you're asking. So thank you, and let's talk about talking.
Rabbi Abrahamson, thank you very, very much. As I was scribbling down lots of notes, and great food for thought, and I really do appreciate it. I'd like to invite anybody who would like to ask questions to put them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we get to them. And let me just start with this. How do we get to the point of civil discourse when so much of our times is living in our own echo chambers of people who agree with us? And then it becomes that much more difficult when we go and have somebody who might think differently than we do, when we're even more charged up because all of my friends agree with me, so obviously I'm right and you're wrong. So how do you manage that?
I answer from experience because I really worked hard at this, and it's really hard. I left Facebook about 4 years ago, very intentionally, because it was not, it just wasn't serving me well. I was in an echo chamber, and then I would get like horrid comments, and people didn't know me. I just left. And I am off of all social media, which has been quite liberating. It actually freed me up to be more open, surprisingly. So I recommend leaving social media. The other thing I did 4 years ago that has been hard but important is that when I used to go to the office, I had a 20-minute drive from my house, and I would spend 11 minutes of it on one radio channel and 11 minutes on an opposing radio channel. So for 4 years, I heard extreme views of our world. And while it is really hard, it was incredibly educational. I mean, it helped me understand just how siloed our world is. And I really encourage people to go to media you disagree with. You may have to bite your lip. You may have a bleeding lip by the end of your 11 minutes. But I found it to be interesting, and I actually found strengths in the opposing network that I'd never expected. The other thing that I've done is intentionally have conversations with people I really disagree with. In the last 10 days, I've been on post-election calls for the extreme right. I've been on post-election calls for the extreme left, and a centrist call. And it's very hard to sit on calls you disagree with, really hard. But it humanizes people, because I know people in all these calls, and these are good people. These aren't bad people, right? And I think one of the hardest moments we're living through is depending on who you voted for, it's the asymmetry is really, really off base, right? We really think, Trump voters are terrible. We think Biden voters stole the election. I mean, that's a pretty crazy reality. And I think it's sort of a bird by bird moment. You've got to do it one bird at a time. And there's plenty of opportunities to hear the other side. You just got to go there. So, I recommend it.
Since you mentioned,
Carol Newman says it's dangerous to listen to the other side while driving.
since you mentioned the election just a second ago, how do we explain the election and the results to our children who are hearing what they're hearing, and how do we do that?
That's a really good question. I think we have to explain to our children that the people are angry, right? And that sometimes anger comes out in all kinds of ways. This might not be a productive way, but I also think we have to explain to our kids, we've got to go back to some basic civics lessons. I've been hearing, I don't know if you've been hearing various journalists talking about, like, this is a great moment to learn about social studies, like how our government should work, right? And I think how it will work. I'm actually amazed at the turnout. Tell them the good news. A lot of people voted. A lot of people have heated opinions. I think we have to tell our kids what the issues are. They don't understand. They only hear the top line fighting. They don't hear what's underneath it. What are people angry about? Well, they're angry about being sick. They're angry about, not having jobs, and how are they going to get money? And they're angry about not having food, and show them the lines around the block in New York. And there's different ways to solve those problems. I think we've got to help them undo kind of the noise. And I really, maybe I'm just a naive optimist. I really think, I dare to think this will be okay. And I think we've got to tell our kids it's going to be okay. And look, I think it's okay to criticize the president's behavior. This is not, how he should behave. And if that's what you believe, that it's important that we accept losses gracefully. It's okay to, pursue avenues to make sure it's fair. But I have adult children and grandchildren too young to have this conversation. So I feel a little bit lucky right now. But I will say that we did have two of our adult children with us for many months, because they left New York City. In the world of difficult conversations and pluralists, I'll divulge that two of our four children are rabbis. We have a daughter who's a conservative rabbi and a son is an Orthodox rabbi. And my husband and I were ordained Reform. So for many months in COVID, we had many opportunities for civil discourse, and it wasn't always easy. And but I do think we learned, especially during the summer and the social justice moment, we learned a lot from them. And it wasn't always easy to have dinner and just listen to some of their raging opinions. But we actually got somewhere. I mean, it really was a personal exercise. So I think listen to our kids,
Sure.
Right?
In your presentation, you talked about empathy and the importance of empathy. How do we instill empathy during this time when we're physically distanced and the forces of social media drive against the core pillars of civil discourse?
Look, I think empathy is taught. I think you learn it by watching others. You learn it by pointing out when someone is being empathetic or not being empathetic. I was recently in a little bookstore before everything closed down, and I noticed there were so many children's books on empathy, and I don't remember those books being around when our kids were little. So it seems to be kind of on the mind of parents. I think you talk about it. I think you use the word a lot. And I think there are lots of ways to reach out to people. I think we're all getting tired of, it was so interesting in the beginning of COVID, right? When there were so many opportunities to read stories to kids or have one-on-one conversations with people in our senior homes. There's a lot of that going on. I think people are getting a little worn out from that. We've got to kind of, I think, up our game as we move into the winter. I'd be curious what people would say, how they teach empathy in their own lives. But I think intention is everything, right? Like if you really want to do it, but there's just so much stuff that makes us forget about it, right? Empathy gets lost pretty quickly in the noise of our world. And we see its lack a lot. I mean, I think I saw an interview, I think it was today, time is so crazy. There was a first responder, a nurse, I think, was describing to a committee, and Joe Biden was sitting there with Kamala Harris, and the nurse started crying, and she apologized for it. And I think Biden said, that's okay. Like, I think he even said, I'm feeling your emotion. He said something where like he really affirmed that, and it was sort of like I took notice because I just haven't seen a lot of that in our discourse, and it was refreshing. It may have been calculated, but it was actually lovely. And I think we have to give voice to that empathy as often as we can. You can't do it too much. I'm just saying, someone says, how do we have civil discourse over science? Yeah, I think that's why I say I think there's limits. I don't think you start with, is mask wearing a good idea? Like, that's not an opportunity for civil discourse. That's just not productive, So I think we have to be careful. I think in that list that this group gave earlier, Israel, Palestinian rights, the Iran Treaty, those are really important conversations to have with people, and that 70% number I find really important. That we tend to believe the people we know. We tend to think politicians are lying. So we've got the advantage here, right? We have relationships, and I think we have as a community, and I think, Mark, as a Federation Director, you probably feel this very keenly. We move away from hard conversations because we don't want to alienate anybody, right? And I don't know if that's good for us to become so parve that, we're not digging into the hard issues. But I don't envy Federation directors.
I appreciate it. You talked, one of the things that certainly is happening in our country feels so divided. And you talk about trying to have civil discourse. It's not one-on-one conversations. It's not even group conversations. It seems to be the whole country needs to be able to have a dialogue with itself. Is that possible? Do we have leadership in place who can find bridges between us to help make that happen? And how do you take it from the micro level to the macro level?
I think the answer right now is no. About our national leadership, I haven't seen it. I do think, I think it can happen on the local level. I think it happens in cities. I think walking into your own city hall, I think people are welcome on committees there. We kind of think big. I think we should be thinking local. I think a lot of change is local and then, simmers up. I think we're probably making a mistake if we look to our national leadership to model civil discourse. It makes me sad, and maybe we'll come back to it someday. I don't know when it last was civil. I would, maybe never. Maybe it's just I don't know, I think it was David Gergen has a book on power and what it takes to be president. And he lists, the requirements. And one of them is a really big ego. You have to have that kind of ego. And I'm not sure that what it takes to get to that level of leadership necessarily serves the kind of discourse that we want to have, right? I don't know how good a listener any president is once they've achieved that level, or any senator. So start local, start with your own community, your own neighborhood, your own local police force. Like, that's where, policing really lives, right? It's in the community. So I would love to see kinder, gentler national leaders, but I'm not looking to them for our models. We just, do it in our synagogues, do it with synagogues. And look, how many synagogues talk to the other synagogue, right? I mean, start there.
So somebody sent me a private note, and then a question just came up. Similar is, but is the Jewish community better or worse at this civil discourse than perhaps other ethnic groups or religious groups? And at the same time, what are your thoughts on having civil discourse conversations across religious lines about religion itself?
Are we better or worse? We should be better, because the Talmud is, right, all arguments. That's what we do. So I think the combination of being a stiff-necked people and a people that likes to argue the details, like the peel pull, right? I don't know how many in this conversation have ever, listened to an argument about a kosher pot. It's kind of unbelievable. Like it's mind-boggling, right? The details of that conversation. So we're really good at wrestling about those details. I think the stiff-necked nature of our opinions gets in the way of having good conversation. We're well educated, and that sometimes means we are sure we're right. And I've heard some pretty explosive things said in community boardrooms when an opinion about Israel is said that someone disagrees with. I'm sure many of you know this, but there was a time, maybe that's still, I think that time still exists actually, where a lot of rabbis just won't give an Israel sermon because they can't. That's not healthy. But no, I don't think I think we're good at fighting. I don't think we're good at civility. We silo up. We silo up by movement. We silo up, by organization. And we do that pretty well. But I think we're also, having said that, I think we're really poised to sit in groups and have these conversations, because I think the will is there. I do think it's important that we find a coalition of the willing, and not, you don't start with everyone in the room and let's go. You've just got to start small. And I think starting small is not so easy for us. When I was ordained, my father of blessed memory said to me, who was a daily minyan goer, he said, remember, you only need 10. Like, don't be looking for the big numbers. And it was actually great advice. Like 10 people around a table having a really hard conversation, like Dayenu, right? And speaking of Dayenu, the Seder is like a home, smaller thing, right? Where we really ask the big question. So that's a good model.
You just said something that piqued my interest. Professional leaders in the Jewish community, rabbis, people in my role, agency directors, as well as the lay leadership of those organizations. How far should we go in being provocative and raising those difficult questions because of the potential fallout impact or what have you that it could have?
That's a great question. I'm sure you think about it all the time, right? I think you have to talk about talking. There's a small group of people talking about this, would be beautiful. What can we talk about, and how can we talk about it? There are great Jewish organizations running conversations. Resetting the Table, I think of offhand, and there's others who are, Jewish facilitators who come in and teach your community how to do this. To do it alone, I think, is a mistake. For Mark to be at the head of the table having this conversation, or president of your board, forget about it. Like, you've got to be at the table. I guess watching, our graduate fellows who are in their 20s, they're not going to stand for a community that doesn't have the hard conversations. They're just not. They're going to go somewhere else for it. They're built for it. They want them. Part of it's generational. I mean, we all wanted, to have those conversations when we were that age, but this is like part of who they are as Jews, and at least a good measure of them. And if we really are serious about engaging them, then we better listen to them. You can't say, come to our programs and, come support us. And, oh, by the way, we don't want your opinion, right? So that's an important step that I think we have to take. And I don't think it's particularly healthy over the long run to have only conversations between, a group of 20 somethings and then another one with a group of, 50 somethings, and never have them hear each other.
So last question.
It's hard work. Yeah.
It is hard work. Last question, two-parter for you. So one is an opportunity to give a commercial. As you mentioned at the beginning, we're bringing the Wexner Heritage Program here to Portland for the second time. It was last year in the mid-'80s.
So you do.
Mid-'90s, sorry about that. Give a short, brief version of what the program is and what your expectation from the foundation is after the program is here from those participants. And then any final words of wisdom before we conclude tonight's program.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for for this conversation. I think it's really an important conversation. The Heritage Program puts intentionally diverse cohorts together, 20 in a community. We do Jewish learning and leadership learning, and it's rigorous and it's intense, and it demands that every member lean in to their own Judaism, to our Torah, and to what it means to be a collaborative leader. We expect them to engage in transformative leadership following their program, and we know that in communities where the program has been executed, that those 20 become, as I'm sure was true in Portland, a generation of leaders for the community. And there's no right answer to where they should go and lead, but we expect them to go and lead within the Jewish world. And I didn't create the program. I'm just blessed to be the president of the foundation where it was created. And it has a real magic to it that is really something. I mean, it really is life-changing, and we hear that over and over and over again. And it's life-changing because of the participants and the faculty, the will of the group to make it work, and the immersive nature of the experience. And that we treat the students really with tremendous seriousness. And my final comment would just be, I think we ignore intentional, difficult conversations at our own peril. I think it's really hard work. It gets moved to the bottom of the list all the time, and it gets moved to the top of the list when we're in crisis, and that's the wrong time to have them. It's like anything else, you know. If you don't practice a good argument in a relationship, when it's time for a big one, you're really in trouble, right? We've got to practice and make time for it, and it gets moved to the bottom of the list for all kinds of reasons, but we've got to have them.
Fantastic.
So,
Rabbi Abrahamson, thank you for joining us tonight. You really provided us a very thoughtful Thursday evening. We're grateful for that, grateful for your time. Enjoy your time in Wisconsin.
I will, thank you.
Everybody on this call, please stay healthy and well, and a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday to all of us next week.
Yes, please stay safe. Please stay safe. Thank you. Someone was a participant, Jordana, said it was magical. Thank you. Appreciate that. And thank you all for hanging in here and for having a conversation about difficult conversations. Now go have one.
You made it easy. So next time we're going to have to get into a real conversation.
Yeah, next time we'll we'll move off of corn and onto Israel and see how that works.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
All right. Everyone stay safe and healthy. Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.